All right, we're gonna tie the swim bug. I keep trying to film this and I keep talking too much. So I will put a list of materials and we'll get going. I would encourage you to, throughout tying this and any other pattern, experiment with your materials, densities, proportions, whatever. But a big part of this is, as with all baitfish flies and mayflies and probably all flies, taper. Skinny in the back, fat in the front. A couple different colors, a holographic and I always like to put in copper, and if I want something flashy, copper and the 1/100ths. Opal. So I'm going to call it mirror flash. But the copper, all baitfish and trout, brown trout, rainbow trout just seem to have, when I see them flash, I see copper. But that 2 or 3 strands of that opal and even a big fly can really light it up. Fly comes out to about 4.5 inches. I like the tail to be about 3. When I say 4.5, if you count the flash and the tips of some of the stuff, maybe 5.5. But what I would call the profile is about 4.5. So you can do that kind of loose. I got a little measuring, actually tape with inches marked off. I could always just put it up to the other feather. So you just put those in an X on top of the shank, and I like to pull them down a little bit. Using GSP 100, up until the head, you can use 140 is a good middle ground. With GSP and with flies that I'm going to fish really hard for a while, and I'm going to have clients fishing them really hard and sometimes in not great conditions. Whatever. I don't want stuff to fall apart. So if it's a little dab of bone dry or super glue, I listened to Kelly Gallup's advice of not using super glue for a long time. So maybe it's I graduated or I got lazy, but I use definitely on musky bugs, but for the tails, for the Mallard Flank tie-in points, a lot of these tie-in points I like to put just a little touch of super glue or bone dry. Bone dry is easy because it's so fast. Saddle tips. So these are all for the bases of some Rooster saddles. And you can see these aren't, I call them tips, but these aren't actually tips. These are the short feathers at the bottom. And you can find these on your standard dry fly saddles. 2 or 3 little guys on each side. And this just adds to the kill. There's a little bit of motion as it's moving. You're just adding a layer to both the taper. I want these to be shorter, and then I'll occasionally do one that's longer, but I'm not adding them at the same length, which realistically would be fine. But if you, as I'm going to be stealing a lot, just as I've stolen so much from Tommy Lynch and Blaine and what they've done and put out into the public, and Blaine's published. I'll probably be stealing a lot of Kelly Gallup's phrasing from his videos. So if you sweat the small stuff, you will be happy with the end product. So if you think about, well, I don't want to tie these in at the back because it's not adding to taper, it's adding to, this length right here. Well, if you keep doing that throughout the fly or look at it the other way, if you do the opposite and say, I want to do this because it emphasizes the taper, when you continue to do that or tie like that or think like that, your end result is going to be something with that much more taper and therefore that much more swimminess. I'm going to eat those words pretty immediately because I'm going to say, you know what, these tails are good enough even though they're not perfect. It's actually the one on this side that I'm unhappy with. Just a little low. That's okay though. On this back, I really don't want much going on with the body, quote unquote. That's going to be made up mostly of the must have been tying some flies. Mostly from the rabbit. So let's go with some gold, some copper, and because I'm into this, some of that UV shrimp. It's got olives and oranges, and it's just a really cool blend. You don't have to use a loop. Do whatever you want. But with GSP, when you do use a loop, as opposed to wrapping it around, if you're dubbing a streamer with GSP and you're not using the dubbing loop, I would suggest you use wax. So when you do use wax, you can't do that, and we'll just end up using that for, who knows, a pheasant tail? So a little bit of ice dub there. Option to hollow tie at this point. Hollow tie what? Rabbit. So the idea behind, I'm going to show you the dubbing loop. The idea behind this is to reduce the amount of mass in the back. And I mean, realistically, with these feathers, they don't hold that much water. Something that doesn't hold that much water, like tightly wound ice dub. And then the rabbit fur, it holds water, but it adds to movement and taper. If I don't want something fat, which I don't, and I don't want the bulk, or rather the weight of the rabbit strips, which can be beneficial if you do it intentionally. If I don't want that, I can just cut it off. And it's not as scary as, I don't know, for some reason I recall being pretty hesitant to put rabbit in a dubbing loop, but no harder than craft fur. Learn to tie, watch Gunner stuff. Learn to tie the chosen one and do the strong fuzzy really well. You can put anything in a dubbing loop. Holding. See if I can do this, show you and not poke my eye out. So it gets a little wound. That's okay. $1.99 at the hardware store. You see me holding onto the hook with my entire hand whenever I'm tying this, because I'm putting a lot, when I'm putting those tie-in points, rabbit my beak, when you're putting the tie-in points right there with GSP, you do want to give it some, apply tension via your thread. I don't even know what I'm saying, but I'm doing a good job of actually tying as opposed to talking the whole time. Mallard flanks, I kind of like these back ones to be our longest. Go back about halfway in the tail. And so with the Mallard flanks, you see me putting 6, 7, 8 wraps there. You get them flat, pliers, your fingernail. If you cut your fingernails too short, like I tend to do, you can use pliers, your vise, but you flatten them out. And if you try to smash into them on your first wrap, well, that worked out perfectly. If it's on a slope, if you haven't left yourself a little gap between the eye and your rabbit, your thread's going to bounce off of it. So a way to tie Mallard flanks in easily is put in, 1, wax your thread, 2, put in 3 or 4 loose wraps working back up towards the base of the feather, and then you apply your tension. I spilled a bunch of bone dry and put it in a little plastic lid. I have a toothpick brush. Made from a paintbrush from my daughter. She's cool with it. It's the back part. The middle part is just a shank, 15 to 25. Going up to 25 allows you to put a rattle in, which the option's always there if you have the space. I'm not going to. I like to reserve, should add that. I like to reserve the rattle in the middle for flies that I know I'm going to make for, basically for flies that I know will be, check that, the 25s are a little too stout for the size 6. So the rattles that go on flies that I know that I'm going to tie larger. So with a size 1 or 1/0 TP610 or the 280s. Since the middle's fat from that rattle, the front has to be big. I dropped that 15mm shank. Where is it? Cool. $15mm shank. This middle section, I don't use the connection cover just because it's small enough to where, gee, I'm all over the place. Right in front of me. This middle section is small enough to where the rabbit that I'm using is going to come back, and there's just the connection cover is both unnecessary time and bulk and material, and I like these sections to be pretty independent of one another. To close off that middle gap when you're using GSP, a little epoxy, some loose wraps with super glue. If you're not using GSP, it's a little easier to close that off. You'll find out if you're allergic to rabbit pretty quickly. Middle section, I am going to use some UV Chenille, not that one. Senya's Aqua Veil, the Baitfish Emulator, which I use for the front. It winds up pretty tight. I, again, cut it off, put it in a dummy loop, but plenty of different filler options. The key here is not fat, a little fat, or really fat with a tightly packed head. And when I'm doing, I don't want all this to be going halfway into the back. So I want it to be about right here. So I cut this evenly about halfway. You can do this in a cleaner way. Doesn't have to be perfect. Cut off any loose ones. Or don't. If you don't trim it, realistically, it's going to be fine. I like to go with a little more bunny on this one. So, you know, from the section that's like this to a section that's about 1.5 times the amount. Rabbit strips vary. So part of tying any fly is figuring some of this stuff out through tying it and then fishing it. But I mean, there's some, I was just tying some mice. There are some rabbit strips that are super long and really under furry. And then this is a really nice middle ground. Have some wax on my vise there. I could be evening this out and using my rotary function, but I think part of this is laziness. I'm not sure. When I'm ending palmering anything, you can wrap it backwards. You'll see Russ Madden do that in some of the videos from Schultz Outfitters. But when I'm palmering something, specifically rabbit hides themselves, the last wrap I'm going around, and instead of coming like this and trying to catch that thread like that, I'm going to come around my thread, and right here, one wrap, two wraps, that thing's caught. Nice way to remove or save yourself from that bulky catching point when you're tying in polymer materials. So again, the cutting, the trimming, the taper, all that stuff it's freedom of movement. And that's also why I like rabbit, craft fur. I don't want things, you know, marabou's great for certain purposes and it's not for others. I don't know why I cut that off because we're still tying in mallard. Again, freedom of movement. I don't want this thing going crazy long over the back. You could even go shorter. Yeah, way too long. So maybe a third. I'm okay with a quarter. with Mallard and GSP, if you see something you don't like, you can get in there and fix it. Better now. Tinfoil and foam, so I can put it around the whole thing and just blast it. Just look away without having to worry about blinding myself. Alexa, what time is it?
It's 5:17 p.m. Hope you've had a good Wednesday.
Front hook, again, the shorter the shank, the wider the gap I like for this front part. I should say for the NS172, the Nordic Salt, and for the XO774, they're a little lighter wire. There isn't as much metal. So with the TP610, that could be completely wrong, but there's enough of a keel here because of the stoutness of this wire. But force required to penetrate, so your set needs to be harder, more direct with the stouter wire. Up into the 4 or 5 inch flies, I've seen you'll get them on the back almost as frequently as you do on the front, and when you're getting them on the back, they're not hanging out of the fish's mouth like this. It's like that because they're coming in and they're hitting the midpoint, and so they're gonna miss this hook. So definitely a stinger if you're a super short hook, or just make the fly smaller. But I like it in the 4 to 5 inch. It seems to be the sweet spot for, at least for trout and in certain conditions. I love fishing giant stuff for trout and really small stuff, but the 4 to 5 is a pretty good middle ground of getting eats when it's not crazy bitey, or you're at least getting follows. I want a bead. Up into the 6, 7, 8 inch range, you're starting to ask for a good amount from the fish, and your percentages just drop. So the 4 to 5 I've seen is a good. You're going to be, your odds of evoking an eat from a big fish, 20, 25. Oh, it's 32 easy. Your odds of getting one of those special class fish I have seen is, they'll eat small stuff, they'll eat giant stuff. Same goes with the small fish. But again, the 4 to 5 inch movement I have seen is really the key. So if you're using just I think strip flies, I want to say that was Tommy's definition, but some of those, my first 2 go-to flies, streamers, specifically for clients, and then if it's not really, I'll put this on first if it's, the water's up, cloud cover, all that good stuff. But my first 2 are Peanut Envy, Olive Peanut Envy, and the White Dungeon. It's just kind of Krelex for smallmouth. I mean the white dungeon in the 3-inch range for smallmouth is just, they're sculpin in nearly every river, so don't think that's just a trout fly. So for this one, up to about halfway, I'm going to be putting in a tight dubbing loop of Baitfish Emulator. And this is really skinny and wiggly and movie. A little bit of taper in the middle with more rabbit and the UV chenille. And then this front is going to be densely packed with this mallard deer hair. Option to go wild with whatever else you want to throw in there. I like to put in a couple reverse wraps around that wire to keep it taut. Again, no connection cover. Just not necessary. And in fact can lead to this back end not moving as freely. Measure that out after I so I don't want it coming back to more than about there. So unlike the, I'll use the Game Changer platform as an example. I'm not as focused on, creating that stair-step bulk, which is a requirement, and it's almost shocking what that does when you really pay attention to it with the changers. This one, I'm focused on movement. So, the jointed rapalas, for example, there's a full gap in between them. Using GSP 200 can be advised if you're going crazy with your loop there. This is going to be fine. Still a little super glue left on that. That's how tight I'm making this material right now, though. So I'm snapping the 100 just from at the tie-in point from the tension of spinning and pulling on it. Oh, that was the bad one. Oof, that gave me the bad chills. Really getting after it today. I have these little magnets that are typically pretty effective. So bulk material of your choosing for this one. But again, the Baitfish Emulator flash I found to be it's about right. Rabbit or craft fur, nothing crazy. I like it to basically mask that flash, and then on the kill, it's going to move forward. What it also does, rabbit, is, same with craft, it carries water with it. So when you pick up and cast it, you have it's weight balanced with water. So I want that. And then when your fly is soaked, when you're fishing it, you pull it out of the water and put it back down on the bank. Have momentum coming with the material that makes it easier to cast and creates a disturbance when it hits. And I'll caution this whole video, whatever I'm saying, that includes on my boat. With the whap on the water, that big splat. I'm sure some people think that's a bad thing. I certainly think it's a good thing. Do whatever you find works for you. That's without question the biggest part of fishing, and with streamer fishing in particular, because that bite window can be off. It can come on pretty quickly and then it can go off again. So whatever you're doing, if you're not enjoying it, or if you feel like maybe it's not working or there's the better option, do something different. You don't have to do the same shit that other people are doing just because they say it works. You don't have to do the same stuff you have done historically because it worked then. So if you're getting bored or whatever, it's not fun, or you want to experiment, I guarantee you, if you do whatever methodology it is, whatever tactic you want to try, if you try that as much as you have your historically successful techniques, you'll find that whatever that new technique is will catch fish. Flank. Right on the side, I'll put in lateral scale on the sides there. It's kind of a cool layering. Right in the side of the hook. And this is where I like to put in another round. Just going to do a little copper. And then I'm going to put another flank here. So I want that to be a little longer. Top flank, stout and wide. Doesn't have to be that long. Again, doesn't need to go back around the fly. And this is smooth relative to the underneath, which is rough. Smooth means a lower surface area compared to rough. Lower surface area means that the same amount of water traveling over a lower surface area compared to a rough surface area creates a slower. The water is moving more slowly over a smoother surface than it is over a rough surface. And when it's moving more slowly, there is a higher pressure. So it wants to track down. The opposite of an airplane wing. Which seems funny because it looks more like an airplane wing, like it would want to lift, but smooth, rough. And the airplane wing is reversed because it's the same viscosity, the metal is, the same coefficient of friction, but there's a greater surface area on the top. Probably lost some folks right there, but that's okay. Maybe that was condescending. I'm not sure. I don't know. I was about to say we'll see if this goes out, but it's going to. Too many efforts. All right, deer hair. So the more dense this is, the bigger your kill is going to be. That said, the more dense it is, the more cautious you need to be with how you shape it. The best way to describe the shape of this is a teardrop with the bottom cut flat. And I'm leaving all that on my collar tie because I'm going to be putting a bunch of hair here and packing it real tight, so there's no worry about creating a gap there. And I'm leaving myself a good amount of space. That would be nice, so I don't rush the head. And I'll probably just do one stack. Pretty dense one, but white on the bottom, then tan, and maybe 2 pencils of tan and then a pencil of brown for a little contrast. I like the idea of a stripe or a dot up in the head moving through the water. And despite me historically not thinking eyes are the trigger or sometimes even a trigger, I'm pretty sure I'm going to walk back from that entirely. Even if it's not the fish thinks they're eyes, it's such a good way to break up the profile, and any amount of that, whatever you want to call it, modeling, contrast. The flymen living eyes are also holographic, so there's some flash. Whether or not you call it contrast, or a fish recognizing it as an eye, whatever. I think there is something to it. 2 turns around. Not necessarily going to go over the mechanics of stacking hair, but 2 loose turns around there. And on that third one, you can bring it around and get tight. This is 100 strand, so I advise using 200, but I don't have any, so I'm using one. Oh, that was a lot of super glue. It's okay, just go fast. That little dot of super glue, or splashing it into the whole head, is on so that when I'm doing this next turn, getting ready to stack this down, my thread isn't moving. And so when I am stacking these 2 back, or when I'm packing these 2 back, they move as one piece. So it's not there to hold these to the hook. In fact, it's the opposite. I want them to then move back as a unit. Not really here for the art on this one. I just want some degree of light on the bottom, darker up top, and some, this is my version of a hot spot in this one. I like using orange, yellow, pink, red, and then for, the contrast type hot spot, brown, black, dark olive. It's going to require a little bit of work. I keep wanting to say stack. Pack that back. Use your packer. That wasn't a, I'm not making a giant popper, so I don't need to go too crazy with the packing part. A little more cautious with my glue there. This time that glue on this one is so that when I put in a couple turn whip finish and cinch back, it's getting pressed back in there and it's staying. Really don't mind if I'm catching hair. I should clarify. I don't mind if I'm catching hair on those little tie-ins against the shank, because it's either going to stick to the shank and I'm okay with that, or with 100 strand, it's just going to cut right through it. So it's not like it's going to trap my thread. I'm using enough tension to where it's either going to cause a problem now, it's a problem that I'll be able to see, or it's just going to cut through it and won't be an issue. So with 200, you can trap a couple fibers and it's going to be a problem. I'm just going to finish this with a big spin here. End up cutting most of the bottom off. And this is where, this isn't a formula. It's not, this needs to be a spin, this needs to be a stack, this, you have to stack this head, whatever. Every fly is going to be just a little different, and with this one, sometimes I leave less space, sometimes I leave a little more. So all this one required was a little spin. Help that around. Helps if you make the face. Also on this, if I catch hair, doing my 3, 4, we'll call it 5. Oh, missed that one. That's okay. Because during that last pull, when I'm doing that last whip, it'll cut through all of that stuff. Little dab. Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 5:41 p.m.
Flat off the bottom. A lot of the times I'll put in UV flex on this bottom piece of rabbit and on the flanks just to make this cutting process less. There's no risk of cutting into your other materials. This, getting the bottom flat and clearing the eyes makes getting symmetry throughout the rest of the fly much easier. And getting a new blade if you need one. I turned the air conditioning off because it's loud. How do I know? This is not the first time I've attempted to film this. It's getting toasty in here. So clearing the eye. That's what I'm talking about. Get in there. Yeah, if you're using GSP and super glue, go around the eye a couple times like that. And now you can look from below, this angle too, and whatever you're seeing is actually the way that this thing's going to come out. If there's too much hair on one side or in the front, and then you look at it like this, it can distort what is truly level. Clearing the eye with your blade like that does basically completely take the edge off of that little piece of the blade. And yes, I make an absolute mess. And then I vacuum. That bottom's kind of the hardest part. From here, I like to go in and I'll take a cut at an angle in my teardrop, and then I'll cut this way, and then I'll round it out. the more obtuse of an angle your face is, so you can leave it kind of flat and it's going to give a really significant kill. It swims a little more off kilter, and your risk of tying something that's rolling over constantly is really high. So if you get it teardrop shape, flat on the bottom, and a little taller up front, or rather a little taller on the top, than just perfectly round. And cutting into the side of the head, I'm going to make up for that shape, that roundness shape, with eyes and a little epoxy. And since I'm putting those, at the level of the hook shank, those are negatively buoyant. Here's where I'm going to round this thing out. And if I'm applying something that is negatively buoyant to my hair bug, but I'm applying it, at the central point or below, then it's going to aid in that keel, what I call keel on the kill. There's keeling on the strip, which is what all of the hydrodynamics are doing. And then there's keeling on the kill, which is what your stout hook and your eyes tied in at the base of your head are doing. With your hair bugs, when you give that last 4, 5, 6 turn big whip finish, throw a little super glue on it, you can really cut into this thing and get back to see where your thread ended up. So it is important to clear the eye throughout this process. And then if your head ends up being a little long, don't be afraid to cut back into it. There's some scenario where I would show all of these different cuts and angles, but not when I'm trying to film it myself. So again, keeping this as a wider face is going to give you a more erratic kill, but can lead to rollover on the strip, which, a dying fish does some pretty crazy stuff. It's just not something I want to put into a fly intentionally, or rather, it's something I would like to avoid. We are one unnecessary cut away from making this more difficult than it needs to be. So that's called done. So flexi, or rather gel glue can work. Eyes, I do Sally Hansen's, let that dry for a couple hours or even 20 minutes, and then you can kind of mash this thing around and fix any little divots. And then put a layer of bone dry. So tie this thing up 4 to 5 inches, fast, short. Pop, 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 pop. Vary that kill up. Biggest fish here for me, and my second biggest fish, trout, I should say, came on this. It is a fly that, you know, I don't tend to jump to when it's, you know, big sun and, you know, new angler type deal. It's there. It takes some doing to fish, and it's also not one, even with experienced folks. It's, if you're not feeling it, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, this, you know, this fly just works. Same with the drunk. If someone is feeling it though, it is, and the bitiness is tipped in the right direction. You got a dropping barometer, cloud cover, maybe some off color water or high water in the tailwater setting. Going to catch them up. There's a lot going on here and a bunch of different stuff incorporated, both from other tires and other flies, along with some of my own brain and a lot of fishing here prior to kicking off my guiding career, and just, you know, getting this thing dialed in along with learning the waters on my own. So if you have questions about anything here, deer hair, the selection of materials, one thing over another, do not hesitate to reach out. And if you want to see other stuff or come fish with me, give me a shout. And have fun, whatever you're doing out there. But most importantly, tying and fishing, have fun. If you don't like doing something, stop doing it.